documentation for that to happen. And so we include that as part of the Synbio thrust, the chassis thrust. So I've mentioned now the test beds and 3 of the 4 thrusts. The 4th thrust is what we call human practices. And that's an important aspect of Synbio, and that's headed up by Paul Rabinow here at Berkeley and Ken Oy at MIT. And there are 2 sides to human practices. One is to involve themselves in the actual projects to see where there would be need for making certain that there's a safety, biosafety being practiced within a particular test bed or thrust. Biosafety means that the organism that you're developing won't survive outside the laboratory, just in case it escapes and there may be something dangerous about it, although there are no projects that we are undertaking that have any danger whatsoever. But there's always this idea that it could slip into the wrong hands and that people can use one of our chassis to build something dangerous. And particularly if we're making this kind of like garage technology that you could take the elements and assemble them in your kitchen or your garage, you know, it's hard to control. So we worry about that. We think about that. And so where can we reduce the risks and dangers, if they exist at all, in the actual practice of what we do? That's how, in one way, human practices can involve themselves in Synbio projects. The other aspect of human practices are the larger issues in terms of the ethics of going around, the ethics behind what we do, and more global issues that have to do with security and safety and policy of how we practice. One of the things that's been talked about here is open source. Do we take everything that we have, that we do, and make it available for everybody without restriction, for example? And so, you know, there is one side that says that other people who practice biology, and not just in Synbio, everywhere, there's value around what they do. Companies are interested, and they would take it, license it, and go on and use it, and there would be royalty payments and licensing and all this other business that has to do with it. And there would be a reason for patents and intellectual property provisions. And so there's this balance of where do you have open source, where do you protect your stuff, protect your intellectual property. There is this discussion that's continuing, and human practices, that's one of the aspects of how you debate and decide where this goes in terms of an overall policy, if possible. So that's just one aspect of it. And then there are numerous discussions that go on with biosecurity, biosafety, being prepared for somebody doing terrorism, for example, with elements that come out of Synbio or other labs that practice synthetic biology, because the access is there, especially if you have the sequence available. So this is really what the role of human practices is. It's kind of has an overview of everything we do and impacts on pretty well everything that's taking place, sort of in a global sense, but also in a practical sense of what the projects are. So those are, in a nutshell, what Synbio is doing. And just to finish it, it's a 5-year project funded, renewable for another 5. We have just completed our 2nd year We have just started year 3, actually. July 1 was year 3 starting. And hopefully this will go on for this year and another 6 years after that.
Fantastic explanation of Synbio.
I might mention one other component of this that I didn't mention before, and that has to do with what my role as the industry liaison officer is. So in addition to these PIs who practice, we have an industry component. We have what we call an IAB, an Industry Alliance Board. And this is composed of member companies that sign up, become members for a fee, and their role is to look at what we're doing. So everything that they see is what's going on in the lab, and some under confidentiality, because some of the work that's being developed in the various labs, some of it will end up in patents and what have you. So they get to see what we're doing because they're members, and they've agreed to keep the confidence where it's required. And their role is to address what we're doing, not just technically, because they do have expertise, but in terms of the value it might bring, it should be bringing to the industry, either now or in the future. So it's an advisory role to sort of make sure that we are working on stuff that's relevant today and in the future. In addition to that, they review our progress for our funding agency, which is the NSF. So in addition to advising us, they also advise the NSF as to how we're doing, where we could be doing things different or better or more relevant. So they hear from us what's going on, and they benefit directly because if they see something they like, they can license it or take it in some way, use it, and get a first crack at it if it's novel. At the same time, their duties to us are to bring back that kind of advice that people in industry can give us, because that's what's lacking in academia right now. So there is this give and take. And this is common practice for engineers. Engineers at universities generally have a much closer connection with industry than just practicing biochemists or microbiologists or molecular biologists. And the experience of engineering really plays into providing a good role model for us to develop this industry relationship. And it's working pretty well. We have, at the present time, about 15 signed up companies with a lot more prospects for membership as well. I mean, it would be great because this is additional input that we would be getting, plus not to mention the fees that they pay, which just goes into our general fund here that we use to support our projects.
So what kind of advice do industry members give to?
Well, for one thing, for example, they would like to see the projects coordinated and run more like a industry-based set of projects than an academic-based set of projects, where we have 5 different labs or 15 different labs, each doing their own thing, and sort of with loose coordination, and it's hard to set goals for each lab independently and measure them differently. But of course, and the industry model is sort of top down and sort of work off a project and have it managed from the top. Well, that's difficult to do in academia, so we look for a balance between them. But the input of how we could do this definitely comes from there. So that's one of the things. The other thing is that more specifically would be to say, and I'm not going to give you any